Right, so hello and welcome back to Books and Things, and welcome to the 10th day of 2 weeks of Elizabeth Gaskell. Today I'm going to be talking about the wonderful Elizabeth Gaskell novel/novella, Cranford. Chapter 1. Our Society. In the first place, Cranford is in possession of the Amazons. All the holders of houses above a certain rent are women. If a married couple comes to settle in the town, somehow the gentleman disappears. He is either fairly frightened to death by being the only man in the Cranford evening parties, or he is accounted by being with his regiment, his ship, or closely engaged in business all the week in the great neighbouring commercial town of Drummle, distant only 20 miles on a railroad. In short, whatever does become of the gentlemen, they are not at Cranford. What could they do if they were there? So Cranford was first published between 1851 and 1853. It was published serially in kind of episodes, and it is sometimes considered a novella and sometimes a novel. It's about 75,000 words, so personally I would consider it a novel, but it seems to be counted in a lot of places as a novella, and it's not massively long. I first read Cranford when I was about 14 or 15 and absolutely loved it, and I'm so utterly fond of this book. I think it is wonderful. As I will go on to say, I don't think it's Elizabeth Gaskell's best structured novel. I don't think it's the best place to start with Elizabeth Gaskell, but I love it so utterly dearly. So, to explain what Cranford is about. Cranford is about the small town of Cranford. A town in which the middle and upper classes are dominated by women, where most of the people who are respectable are women, single women, women who are widows or who never married, women who live with their sisters or their friends, women who live alone, women who are all very respectable, very genteel, a bit poor, but they don't like to talk about the fact that they're poor, and they all like to pretend that all of them have quite a lot of money, even though none of them really do. And the book is basically about the community and the society of these women. It's told from the perspective of a youngish woman called Mary. We're not entirely certain how old she is, but she's certainly younger than the vast majority of the women living in Cranford, most of whom are in their 50s and 60s. Mary has family friends in the town. From a young age, she goes to stay with her friends, the Miss Jenkins, two sisters, and she gets to know the rest of the women in Cranford and discover everything about the society there. So, I should say that Cranford does not have that much of a plot. It is not a plot-driven book. It is a society and character-driven book. It's mostly about the place and the community of these women, and it's quite episodic in feel. Every chapter or a few chapters feels like it has its own contained story, and although there is sort of progression over the course of the book, and we do get to find out a lot of new things and things do change and occur, for the most part it does feel quite episodical, which is something I really enjoy about it. There are many things I love about Cranford. For one, I quite like the fact that it's narrated by someone who it's not really about. We know so little about Mary. Like I said, we don't know how old she is. It's quite a way into the book before we ever find out her name. We know that her father works in manufacturing fairly nearby, but we don't really know anything beyond that. We don't know what's happened to Mary's mother. We barely know what her father does. Her name is Mary Smith, which is about as basic and anonymous a Victorian female name as you can get. I really enjoy that. I think it's really interesting. I also really love the community and the society of these women. The way that Cranford basically presents this kind of proto-feminism, not necessarily a feminism that we would agree to or subscribe to today. It is very much a domestic feminism. None of these women want to go out and work. They just really don't want men in their houses, because there is this running joke throughout a lot of the single women in this book who have never been married that they have managed to escape the dreaded fate of matrimony, and that they all have to be really careful because matrimony could basically befall anyone at any point, and even if you're in your 50s or your 60s, you're really not safe, and you must therefore be wary of all men. A lot of the women in Cranford show a great contempt for men and male society. It is a great joy of the lives of many of these women in Cranford that they are completely independent from men, and that's one of the things that's really interesting in this book, is that it's looking at a female society of these women who are independent from men and who hold themselves on purpose independent from men and are very proud of the fact that they're independent from men. That's something I find really enjoyable and interesting about Cranford. When they need help, they turn to each other, and they do help and support each other through all kinds of things in this book, and I love the relationships and the friendships between these women in Cranford. I think it's so beautifully explored. And I do think one of the reasons I love Cranford so much, and one of the reasons it has such like a hold on my heart, is because of that kind of community, and because I think there are communities like that that still exist quite a lot of the time. As a child and a teenager, I used to go every summer to stay with one of my great aunts, and she and a lot of other women from her church who were widows or who were single would get together like every week and have a coffee morning, and I remember going to these coffee mornings and being like the only person in the room under 6 1960, and when I read Cranford I remember that, and though that was like in the 2000s, so that is like 150 years after Cranford is set, those kind of communities still exist. Another thing I love about Cranford is its balance in tone. It is hilarious. It is one of Gaskell's funniest books, and there are some absolutely hilarious, wonderful moments in it. Some of the characters are just hysterical in the things that they say and the way they contradict each other, in their spiteful remarks, in their comic remarks, in the strange things to do with domesticity that they do. But there are also moments of real poignancy and sadness and tenderness. There are bits in this book that make me cry. I reread it in August and it was such a delight to reread and discover, because it makes me feel so many emotions, because it brings so many warm feelings into my heart, because it is such a thoroughly touching and moving story about these people who make the best of the lives that they have and also do their absolute best to make the best of other people's lives, because they care so very dearly for one another and they are such a strong community. That is the thing I think I love about Cranford so much, is that it is about a community of women and the relationships between them and the friendships they draw and the way that they manage to change each other's lives. There is so much goodness and human kindness in Cranford, and that is what I adore about it. I think that is what makes me so happy, and I love it. Saying that, I wouldn't necessarily start with Cranford. I think a lot of people read Cranford first because it is one of Elizabeth Gaskell's best known books, but also it's quite short, but I wouldn't start with it because I think it's quite confusing. It's a long time before you're aware who everyone is, before you're aware how old everyone is, and the structure, while I love it, the structure isn't exactly perfect, and although it gives you a wonderful sense of Cranford, you often feel like there are a lot of logistical details missing. However, it remains my fifth favourite thing by Elizabeth Gaskell because I do love it so very much. I think it is absolutely wonderful, so enjoyable and rich and warm and beautiful, and it makes me so nostalgic and happy. I would also highly recommend the TV adaptation of Cranford, in which Cranford was adapted to screen alongside the novellas Mr. Harrison's Confessions and My Lady Ludlow, which I've talked about earlier on this week. It is a very good, enjoyable TV adaptation, and it very much especially brings out the elements of humour and gossip within Cranford, while also dealing with the more moving moments, as I said, as well. It is well worth a watch, just as this is well worth a read. Thank you very much for watching. Please let me know down in the comments if you have read Cranford and what you thought of it, and I'll be back tomorrow to talk about my fourth favourite Elizabeth Gaskell book.